Welcome to Cattle Connect, your insight into Alabama's beef cattle industry. I'm your host, Kayla Greer, and this is Cattle Connect, brought to you by the Alabama Cattlemen's Association.
Welcome back to the 6th week of the Cattle Connect podcast, and I already know I feel like I'm reporting to the principal's office. It should be the 7th week, but hey, cut us some slack. Last week we were a little preoccupied. As many of you may know, this time last week, our staff was preparing to kick off our largest event that we host as an association, and that was the 81st Annual ACA Convention and Trade Show in Huntsville, Alabama. We had a great event. We hosted over 800 cattle producers from each of Alabama's 67 counties through our trade show doors. And not only that, but the content of the event was it was good. Our educational sessions were top-notch. The nighttime meals were just downright fun, and there was no shortage of networking and time to catch up with old friends. So if you have never been to our annual convention and trade show, just let me go ahead and throw out a plug for next February 2025. We'll be in Birmingham, Alabama, and we'd love to see you there. So going back and speaking about those educational events, our sessions, they hosted some top-notch speakers. And if you tuned into the 3rd episode of the Cattle Connect podcast, or if you were at convention, then you already know about that lineup. However, if you missed out on all the fun, then you're going to particularly enjoy today's podcast. Little different from previous weeks, you might notice that I'm not joined in studio today with my trusty co-host, Aaron Beasley. Shout out to you, Aaron. We miss you. But instead, you guys are going to get to enjoy a series of interviews from our convention speakers. After they stepped off stage, I pulled them off to the side and grabbed a quick interview that you guys are going to get to enjoy today. And what they did was they revisited the topics that were discussed on stage. So even if you missed them in person, you don't have to miss out completely. Don't worry, the podcast is here to save the day. So we encourage you to sit back and listen up as we kick off a series of 3 interviews broken up by some commercial breaks, and then I'll come back in at the end to see you guys off until next week.
Your membership matters. Join the ACA today and enjoy exclusive member benefits, including a subscription to the Alabama Cattleman magazine. Learn more today at bamabeef.org/join.
This weekend at the 81st Annual ACA Convention and Trade Show, we've had no shortage of variety when it comes to speakers. From litigators to veterinarians to the lieutenant governor and home chefs, there was something new and exciting for everyone to take in throughout the weekend. Our first interview today is no exception. I'm joined live at the ACA Convention with Secretary of State Wes Allen. Secretary Allen, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Kayla. I appreciate it.
What brings you to Huntsville for the Cattlemen's Convention this weekend?
Well, I was able to receive an invitation to speak to the Board of Directors luncheon yesterday, and what an honor it is to be with y'all and all these fine Alabama patriots and the growers of cattle and producers of cattle. And so it's just good to be here with y'all and been friends for a long time. So thank y'all.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here. Yeah. Secretary Allen keynoted our Board of Directors luncheon that we held on Friday throughout convention and did a great job addressing that crowd. So far, Secretary Allen, you have seen most of what the Bama Beef Meat has to offer its attendees. From your unique perspective as a cattle producer, right, or a former cattle producer?
Well, my family used to, but we own a farm, but we've done some row cropping in the past where we lease it out. Yeah.
Okay. Well, as a farmer, from your unique perspective as a farmer and as a constitutional officer of the state of Alabama, what are some of the highlights that you would say are of this event?
Well, just to reconnect with so many friends throughout the state that I got to know and be friends with on the campaign trail. That's one of the benefits that I enjoy, is just reconnecting with friends. Also, just to see your trade show. It's really impressive on that floor out there to see all the vendors that y'all been able to bring in and what you offer to the cattle producers around the state. That's tremendous as well. And just all the networking that goes on, because really in the end, everything is about relationships, and having good friendships and relationships with folks around the state is really important. We want to be accessible in the Secretary of State's office, so anytime anybody needs any help or assistance, we want to make sure that we get that taken care of, any questions answered.
Great. Yeah, there's a lot of networking going on. It took us a second to find a quiet place to have this conversation. Right. So there's a lot going on. Our trade show is the largest cattle industry trade show in the state of Alabama, and we're proud of it, and we appreciate you and stopping by and visiting with our vendors.
Well, it's tremendous. Thank you.
And last but certainly not least,
Yeah.
from your office there on Goat Hill, what's happening? Any news out of there that we need to hear about or know about?
Well, the primary's coming up March the 5th, so
That's
I would
right.
encourage all of your listeners. I know they're very engaged in the political process anyway, but of course, don't forget about March 5th primary. It's important. And,
What are some of the names we might see on that ballot?
well, of course, it's the presidential primary, so you're going to see all the presidential candidates on there. You're going to see the Chief Justice race. You're going to have congressional candidates in the 7 congressional races across the state. Then, of course, you got a plethora of local races throughout the counties in the state. So I would encourage everyone to do their research, make sure they're prepared on March the 5th. And we're just been in constant communication with all the probate judges, circuit clerks, sheriffs, and the boards of registrars, because those are really the ones who run the elections. I mean, those are tremendous people who put so much work in. I'm so appreciative to them. Me, myself, I was a former probate judge, so I know exactly.
You know how much work goes into that.
I know how much work goes into it. I know exactly what they're going through right now because I've been in their shoes before, and so I'm appreciative to them.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us this weekend, and we hope you have a great time the rest of the day here at Cattlemen's Convention.
Well, thank y'all so much for inviting me.
We hope you're enjoying this week's podcast, but the fun doesn't have to stop here. Get benefits like this and so many more to stay connected to Alabama's beef cattle industry today by visiting us online at bamabeef.org/join.
We would be missing out if we didn't interview our Cattlemen's Luncheon keynote that we had with us this year, and that is Lieutenant Governor Will Ainsworth. Governor Ainsworth, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, no, always great to be here. I'm a member of Cattlemen's Association. I mean, what just a great group of people, and just get to talk about our values, the stuff we're working on in the state. Really enjoyed the luncheon today. It was awesome.
Yeah, and we had a great crowd there that were excited to hear you. If you could just kind of briefly, I know that's hard to do, but briefly just recap some of the initiatives that you talked about during the Cattlemen's Luncheon so that our folks that weren't there can maybe hear.
Sure, no, glad to do that. First, talked about the state's doing well from a budget standpoint. We continue to see people move to our state, and so we're probably in the best fiscal shape our state's ever been in. Also talked about workforce development and how that's a passion to get every child in the state trained for a 21st century job. When you look at it, we've got 45% of our students in the state that end up not getting a 2 or 4 year degree. So we're creating a new diploma in high school called the Career Pathways Diploma, where they'll spend less time in the classroom, more time learning a trade, whether it's welding, potentially construction, whatever it is, they can go out and learn that. We think that's important. Also talked about our military and veterans families and just how important that is. We don't have a state or a country if it's not for our active and veterans military. Our goal's simple. We want to be the most military and veteran-friendly state in the country. Also, an issue I know your members will care about is property taxes. And we've got a bill that's going to cap property tax rate increases every year. 3% on farms and homes, 5% on businesses. Just because, and I know some of your members have felt it, property taxes have got out of control. And they're going way too up. It's hurting people. We've got to cap the increase, and so we've got a bill to do that.
Yeah, we appreciate that. We talked about that bill, the real property tax assessment, a couple of podcasts ago on our ACA Legislative Priorities episode, so you guys go check that out. Representative Philip Pettis is carrying that in the House, and Senator Sessions is carrying it in the Senate. So we are tracking that movement of that bill, and we'll be advocating for it on behalf of you guys as Cattlemen's members. All right, Governor Ainsworth, you're not just Lieutenant Governor. You're a cattleman, right? So tell us about that.
Yeah, so I've got been a cattleman. Right now, I've downsized tremendously. I used to have over 200 head. I probably have about 25 right now. We've got purebred Brahmins. Most of our stock came from even V8 or Hudgens. Bought some Circle F down in Georgia, but we got into the Brahmins, purebred, to raise bulls, produce our own bulls because we were producing tiger stripes and crossing with Herefords. And, now we just I love Brahmins, and I guess I'm kind of one of the unique people. And our Brahmins are pretty docile and fairly calm. I mean, I told everybody in the meeting today, my kids helped raise some. There was one of the bulls they actually rode, right? And they could get on them and ride them, and he was cool with it. No, I wouldn't do that in a shoot because that would be rough. But, yes, we raise Brahmins, a small operation, about 25, and but love it, enjoy it. And, man, it's for me, raising animals, raising kids on a farm. That's kind of what life's about. So it's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we appreciate you being here. He brought his kids with him to the show, so before attending the luncheon and speaking, they got to enjoy the trade show, and we just appreciate you being here visiting with our members.
They loved it. The kids were like super fired up. We had steak, right? Which is what you expect at Cattleman's,
Exactly.
but they love steak and love food. But I think it's important, mate, to make sure kids understand, farming and agriculture. And obviously my kids have lived it, but they need to come to stuff like this and understand that, laws matter, and that we better make sure that we get good people in public policy positions. And then also they need to understand what organizations like the Cattlemen's that I'm a member of, right, that they understand like why they're important. And because if you don't expose kids to stuff, they're not going to learn. So I was glad they got to come, and thank y'all for letting them come.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we appreciate you advocating for that on the countryside and in your own home. So thanks for being here and joining us this weekend.
Glad to do it. Anything I can do to help your members, please reach out to us. We work for y'all.
Don't rely on podcasts alone to stay connected to Alabama's beef industry. Follow us at AL Cattlemen on Facebook and Instagram to get daily news and updates from the Alabama Cattlemen's Association.
All right, our next interview is one that you don't want to miss. Our friend Mary Thomas Hart, who serves as Chief Counsel with the NCBA Center for Public Policy, joined us to keynote our second general session of the weekend. She riled the crowd with her poignant presentation and her in-depth knowledge, and let me tell you, she has literally taken on some of the toughest challenges that we faced as a modern industry, and she's done it with grace. She is an excellent advocate and litigator for the American cattlemen. Mary Thomas, thanks for joining us this weekend.
Thanks for having me, Kayla.
Absolutely. So before we get too much into our chat, can you give us a quick introduction of yourself, and be sure to mention you are a down-home girl. Talk about your Alabama roots.
I am. So again, my name's Mary Thomas Hart. I'm Chief Counsel for NCBA, and I'm based in our Washington, D.C. office. And while I grew up in Florida, in North Florida, my mom is from Lowndes County, and I spent a lot of summers in Hayneville, so much so that I definitely consider Alabama a second home, and even went to law school at Sanford.
So we're just going to jump right into the nuts and bolts of all the things that you talked about today during your general session conversation. So starting, just moving along with the rubric of your talk, we're going to hit with the Farm Bill. It's been all the buzz in the agricultural sector, and it's still in the works. It's been a long process. Can you give us an update on where it's at in the process and what are NCBA's priorities with that package?
Of course. All talk, no action, it seems, on Capitol Hill. We were supposed to have a new farm bill by the end of September 2023. Obviously, that didn't happen. And the House and Senate Ag Committees are still in the process of writing that bill. So as they continue to draft that bill, we really have three big priorities. The first being maintained access to really important voluntary conservation programs like CRP, CSP, EQIP, and technical assistance from NRCS. The second being those availability of risk management programs and risk protection tools like LRP. And then the third being animal disease preparedness tools like our FMD vaccine bank that was developed after the 2018 Farm Bill.
Yes, you guys have heard us talk a lot about animal disease traceability here in the state of Alabama, and it's a conversation on the national front for sure.
Absolutely. And, I think when traceability comes up, at least for NCBA, we are primarily thinking about animal disease traceability, right? We want to make sure that if there's an FMD outbreak, we're able to address that as effectively and as quickly as possible, because the longer that the industry is halted, essentially, which is what would happen if there was an outbreak, that is money not going into producers' pockets, quite frankly.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the stat. I think yesterday our state veterinarian, Dr. Tony Frazier, mentioned that it was estimated that it was $565 million for every hour that the disease went undetected.
That sounds about right. The last big stat that I heard is that the economic hit would be a greater hit to the GDP, like the national GDP, than the 2008 recession.
We're just going to pray that away.
I think it shows you just how much our industry matters.
Yeah, how impactful it is.
And, we're pretty decentralized, right? Like, it's easy to be on a ranch and not really think about what goes on outside your community, but we have a massive impact on the American economy, obviously the American diet, but, also the natural resources that we manage. I think, collectively, we are the largest single industry managing acreage in the United States.
Yeah, there's a much bigger picture happening there. out on the countryside, and you all are involved in it. So moving on to the next kind of piece that you talked about during your talk, you mentioned about a new rule regarding the EPA and greenhouse gas emission reports. Can you elaborate on that and how NCBA activated on that front?
Sure. So, greenhouse gas reporting is always a concern, I guess, and it seems like it comes from a million different directions. So what I mentioned in my presentation this morning was related to actually an existing EPA rule that would mandate greenhouse gas emissions reporting from a lot of farms and ranches across the country. But fortunately, we don't have to file those reports because there's existing legislative text that basically defunds EPA being able to collect those reports. So we're really fortunate to be able to maintain that appropriations language every year through our legislative efforts. But we've seen an increase in, I guess, interest in getting that information from other agencies as well. Most recently, the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, actually proposed a rule that would mandate greenhouse gas emissions reporting for all publicly traded companies. And because we're selling into those publicly traded companies, right? Think Walmart, think, Ruth Chris, any both on the restaurant and retail side, if you're selling beef into one of those publicly traded supply chains, then that information would have to be turned over. Luckily, I think, we've done a really good job working with the SEC, and we expect them to finalize a rule that actually doesn't include that reporting requirement, which will be a huge win. But I think it shows that we have a lot of education to do across the federal government about why it is wholly improper to ask for those types of reports.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put that. And we appreciate the work that you guys are doing on that home front. Again, you guys, there's just so much to say about the work that NCBA does. We like to say that they put boots on the ground on Capitol Hill while you manage your farm. And our ACA now past president, Chuck Medeiros, just is a huge advocate for he uses the phrase all the time, I don't want to do that. I don't want to go to any, State House or Capitol Hill. That's not my thing. And so these guys are doing an incredible job. Y'all have a team of 9 lobbyists, I think you referenced earlier, and they just do an incredible job there in D.C. So moving on to a topic that we are familiar with here in the state of Alabama because it's been a little bit of a buzz, fake meat.
Ooh, yeah.
So here in Alabama, we've got a bill in motion currently in the session that's being carried by Senator Jack Williams that bans the manufacture, sale, or distribution of cell-cultured food products in the state. And I called them food products because we have 2017 legislation. It was a Transparency and Labeling Act that we lobbied for. So they can't use the word meat on their labels. They have to say food products. Okay. We just wanted the consumer to know what they were getting. We don't want them to think they're getting meat that we raised if it's cell culture products. So the bill that I mentioned being carried by Senator Williams, he's jokingly in the State House being referred to as the Frankenstein meat bill. And so we have some fake meat conversations going on here in the state. What's happening in D.C. And how is NCBA advocating on that front?
It sounds like ACA has made a very similar recognition to NCBA, and we're kind of approaching it similarly. So it sounds like ACA has realized that there isn't a silver bullet solution, right? You've got to have a couple different pieces of policy that work together to achieve your goal, and NCBA is certainly in the same camp. A few years back, probably 2018 or 2019, there was an agreement between FDA and USDA about how these products would be regulated because we were really concerned. We don't want to acknowledge that they're meat, but we also don't want FDA to be the primary regulatory authority because FDA is bad at regulating. So we wanted, if these products are going to come to market, we need them to be held to the very high standard that traditional meat production and processing are. Food safety requirements, inspection requirements, all of that good stuff. We don't want some company in Silicon Valley to get out of those requirements, right? And then if something happened in the food safety space, it would make us all look bad.
That's right.
So that piece, the food safety piece, is certainly huge, and we continue to work in that space. I think most recently we're prepared to ask Congress to mandate that USDA develop a standard of identity so that those products can't call themselves beef, pork, chicken, you name it, because you all have worked so hard to create a really solid and good reputation for the word beef, right?
Well, and I think there's a awful case study in our friends in the dairy industry that we all have learned from in that spectrum.
Right. You're exactly right. And even if you go to the grocery store, eggs are kind of the same way. Like, I almost bought a vegan, fake egg product a couple weeks ago because it literally said egg on the carton. And only until I got a couple aisles down and I was like, wait, this isn't even real egg, and I had to take it back. But I think we tend to make fun of consumers, but really it is tough to be an informed consumer at the grocery store, especially with all of the kind of imitation products that are available. The one other policy piece that I'll kind of point to, we're really interested in keeping these types of products out of the National School Lunch Program. We know that kids learn to eat and learn what they like. They develop a palate from an early age. And we also know that there are I think pretty significant cognitive benefits to getting all of the macro and micronutrients that you get from actually eating beef. So we want to make sure that high nutrition product is available to kids through the school lunch program, and that companies or the federal government aren't trying to skirt that by substituting it for a fake product.
Yeah, totally behind that and understand that cause there. Kids, it feels like they spend more time at school sometimes than they do at home, so they are definitely learning their culture and what they accept and what they enjoy in the school front.
And for so many kids across the country, they're getting 2 of their 3 meals a day.
Yeah, that's right.
And maybe the only 2 meals that they're going to eat that day.
Yeah.
Maybe their only 10 meals of the week are coming from school. So I think it's so important to make sure that kids have access to healthy and nutritious foods, but also that we're feeding them the real thing.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. We're going to jump into a biggie here. This is an area of expertise that we know for you particularly. It's WOTUS, Waters of the U.S. Can you tell our listeners why the NCBA and its state affiliates went so hard to bat up against this Biden administration version of the WOTUS ruling, and what was the outcome of those efforts?
Absolutely. We've been fighting regulatory definitions of WOTUS long before I joined NCBA, long before either of us were born.
Yes.
Since the Clean Water Act was passed in the 70s. If you're in operation and you've been in business since 1970, you've dealt with 14 different regulatory WOTUS definitions, which is wild to me. But we really became activated back in 2015 when the Obama administration finalized a WOTUS definition that seemingly was more focused on regulating dry land than it was focused on regulating water.
Yeah.
When you pull in ephemeral features that only carry water after it rains, that's when you're talking about regulating most of the dry land in the United States, right?
Particularly here in the South.
Particularly in the Southeast and east of the Mississippi River, right?
Yeah.
You are definitely getting into some areas where entire states would have been subject to federal jurisdiction. So we fought the Obama definition in court. Then the Trump administration rewrote that definition. We were much more supportive of that definition.
Right.
Then the Biden administration did another rewrite of the definition, got us practically back to where the Obama rule was. So we took it to court. Meanwhile, there was a case going up to the Supreme Court, and it was a family in Idaho who were trying to build a lake house. And the EPA and Army Corps of Engineers showed up and told them they needed a very costly permit because they were messing with waters of the U.S. And this couple was like, really? Because we're in a subdivision. There are tons of other houses that have been built. This clearly isn't something you've cared about until now. So they took it to the Supreme Court and asked if the wetland in that area was federally jurisdictional. We submitted an amicus brief to the court in defense of that couple, and ultimately the Supreme Court held unanimously. So not just the conservative justices, it was every justice on the bench found in favor of that couple, and found that those wetlands were not jurisdictional.
That's awesome. Yeah, you never hear that. It's usually like a 5-4 decision or something like that. So that's cool.
Exactly. And it's given us, I think, a really good opportunity now with that decision to go back to the Biden administration and say, look, you don't just have to answer to 5 conservative justices. You have to answer to a unanimous court. And so we have a new version of the rule based on that opinion that I think gets us about 85% of the way there. That's what I say is like, we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. There are still some open questions about really how EPA is going to treat interstate waters that cross state boundaries. But other than that, I feel like we have come a long way on WOTUS in the last year, and we can maybe kind of move on to focusing on some other big issues.
Yeah, well, you guys can all appreciate the work that they're doing there. You know, we live in what's called America's Amazon with all of our waterways here in the state of Alabama. So there is not a farm on this state that doesn't have some type of navigable waterway on it. And so you guys stay tuned, stay paying attention, and continue to submit your comments and support as needed on this topic. So the American cattle industry is a beast, right? We talked about that earlier. There's this monstrosity of a picture there. And there are many issues and mindsets across the different regions of the state. You know, we might see things differently than maybe they do out west or in the Northeast. And as a lobbyist for NCBA, what houses your guidelines? Can you chat about the policy development that NCBA has in place?
Of course, yeah, and I think we get questions like that a lot, right? Because if you're from the South and or from the rural West, you may not agree with us, spending time or dedicating resources to working on the CAFO permit, right? Because that's feeder specific. Or if you're a feeder, you may not care a lot about, NEPA regulations because that really only impacts our public lands ranchers in the West. But how we divide our resources and our efforts is all rooted in our policy book, right? And that's, I think, one of the reasons why I'm so proud to work for NCBA is because we are an association made up of 44 state affiliates and then 26,000 individual producers that also join NCBA every year. But all of the policy that goes into our policy book comes up through the grassroots process. So it starts at a county cattlemen's meeting. Someone brings that policy, it passes, it goes to the state meeting. It's considered and passed at the state meeting. That state decides to bring it to NCBA, and we meet twice a year. We have 7 policy committees, I believe, and I manage our property rights and environmental management policy committee. And that policy committee meets every summer and every winter and considers policy that's passed through the various state meetings. And some years we might pass 5 policies, some years we might pass none. But every policy that I end up advocating on has the full consideration and eventual endorsement of the state affiliates. And I think, no one goes home feeling like they've completely won everything, right? Because that's the art and the beauty of compromise, is that we take one step together forward instead of maybe 10 steps forward or 10 steps back. And I think, when we look at the grand scheme and who all we're working with in Washington, NCBA is one of the only associations that truly has and respects the grassroots process.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier that once that policy is voted on, it's passed, it's resolved, it goes through some editing process, and once it gets the clear, that's your trigger as a lobbyist to get to work, to head to the Hill.
You're exactly right. So when the policy is passed by the committee, it goes through the resolutions committee, basically the grammar committee, and then it's considered by our board of directors, and once it's passed by the board of directors, it's in the books, and I'm going to town. That's the signal for me to hit Capitol Hill and start lobbying. And a lot of times I'll get a call from an individual producer who's like, "Why aren't you working enough on this?" And I'll say, we don't have policy on it. But the second I have policy, I'm on the Hill. So our policy book really does drive everything that we work on in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, and just bringing that back home, guys, we have a very similar process here in the state of Alabama. Again, starts at the county level. You can submit a policy change or a new policy or an amendment, and starts at the county level. Your county president will bring it to the state office or to the state board, and it's goes through the voting process from there. And if it's passed, again, that's mine and Aaron's signal to get to work. And we developed that policy book probably in the last 5 years, and it's been a great tool for Aaron and I as we navigate which bills that we're going to activate on or not activate on. I think that's just as important as to know what not to activate on as it is to know what to get to work on. So, well, Mary Thomas, this has been great. You and the team of lobbyists in D.C. do great work, and we appreciate your efforts and your passion. Clearly, you're so passionate about this. I wish y'all could see her face when she's talking about this. The podcast, I mentioned this in a couple of episodes. You need that nonverbal communication sometimes that you can't get from a podcast. But before I let you go, I've got to ask one more thing. What would you say to a cattleman who wasn't sure if they wanted to become a member of NCBA? How would you convince them?
It depends. So if they're already a member of Alabama Cattlemen, which I assume most of your listeners are, I would say that NCBA is here to bolster and support the work of Alabama Cattlemen and make sure that you're represented in Washington, D.C. You know, everyone has some form of representation of Washington, D.C. The cattle industry is going to be represented, but do you want to have a voice? And I think NCBA is the best way to guarantee that it's not just the voice of the cattle industry, it's your voice, right? Because of our grassroots process, I may not meet every NCBA member. I may not get to have a conversation with every NCBA member, but I know because of the grassroots process that when I advocate, based on our policy book, that I am advocating on behalf of all of those state affiliates and all of those direct members.
Yeah, well, there you have it, folks. Straight from the horse's mouth, all the work that's being done in D.C. and why you should consider being an NCBA member. Mary Thomas, thank you so much for joining us this weekend and on our podcast.
Of course, thank you so much for having me.
Well, there is a sound that we all know and love. It is time for this week's Cattle Connect Fast Facts. The first one up on the docket has to do with convention. Shocker. Today's episode had a lot to do with convention, and so we want to report to you who your new state officers are. One of the major goals of convention is to get a nominating committee report during our annual membership meeting, and we are proud to report that we have a new slate of state officers that had no dissenting votes from the membership. So those officers are Dr. Terry Slayton of Coleman County as our president. President-elect is Keith Glover of Hale County. Vice President is Wyatt Sasser of Covington County. And our treasurer is Richard Meadows of Houston County. So you guys be sure to welcome them to the officer team. And thank you, gentlemen, so much for your leadership. We look forward to a year working with you guys. Number 2 on the Fast Facts, YCLP, Young Cattlemen's Leadership Program. You might have seen if you were at convention, we graduated the 10th class of our YCLP students, and it is not too late to become a member of Class 11. You have until mid-March to get signed up. You can go online to bamabeef.org/YCLP to submit an application. And if you have any questions, reach out to a local cattle producer who was a member of one of our previous classes, or call our office and ask to speak to Reed McGuire. Last but certainly not least, it is time to saddle up for the SLE Rodeo. We've got the rodeo coming in town March 15th through the 17th. So get online, slerodeo.com, get those tickets, explore the calendar of events, and look forward to next week, as I will be in studio with SLE Executive Director Sarah Hunter as we explore the SLE's unique mission.
Well, folks, thanks for tuning in to this episode of Cattle Connect, brought to you by the Alabama Cattlemen's Association. Be sure to subscribe to get notified when our next episode goes live. And until next time, remember, beef, it's what's for dinner.